Welcome to the Legacy Leaders Podcast. Are you doing the best for your client to help them create their legacy? Are you creating a plan that goes far beyond finances to help people ensure that it becomes the driving force behind all decisions? On this podcast, hosts Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller will help you with growing your practice and your clients' peace of mind. Together, they bring the best and brightest minds to share with you how to help your clients develop their best legacy. And now, here are your hosts, Katie Beth and Stan.
Welcome back to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Katie Beth Hand. My guest today is the president and managing partner of Great Days Leadership, Dr. Matt Paden. Dr. Paden, thank you so much for jumping on with me. I am so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Katie Beth. I'm excited to be here with you today.
Absolutely. So before we dive in with all of my questions on leadership, will you take just a couple of minutes and tell our listeners a little bit about your background?
Sure, happy to do so. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, tell you a little bit more about what we do at Great Days, but more importantly, just have a conversation about leadership and legacy and all the good things that I know you guys like to talk about. So, as you mentioned, my name is Matt Paden and serve as president and managing partner of a consulting company that we started about 15 months ago, doing leadership and organizational development, consulting work and coaching for a wide range of different types of organizations and institutions. So everything from small to mid-sized businesses. Our largest client at this point has been a Fortune 100 company. I've been excited to work on the business side. We also work with nonprofits and educational institutions. My background is primarily in higher education, in the administrative side. I served as the executive vice president, before that a senior vice president, most recently of Lipscomb University here in Nashville, Tennessee. And so 20 plus years of higher education as the core piece of my work, but over the years had done quite a few consulting gigs and side projects and speaking opportunities for different groups around. And about 15 months ago, along with some business partners, decided to see where this would take us. And it's been an amazing ride and just feel blessed, really, that we can even be here at this point talking to you all, but also that we're just seeing things move the way they are. So a lot of experience outside of higher education has to do with real estate and small business advising and some other things like that. But for the most part, it's all been based on leadership and organizational development related activities. We like to say that we try to help leaders, teams, and organizations move from where they are to where they need to be. And so there's no cookie cutter approach to that. There are a lot of cookie cutter options. We try to be very customized and very intentional about our work and who we choose to work with. And so it has been a wild ride as an entrepreneur, but it has been a lot of fun. And so eager to tell you more as we need to throughout our time together, but just grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today.
That's great. No, I love the background and in higher education. I have so much respect for all of the different things you've gotten to do. And I imagine a lot of your philosophy and the wisdom that you have in starting this company comes from all of the different roles and styles of leadership you've probably experienced over the years in the different positions that you've held. So very interesting. You've said before that your leadership philosophy is actually rooted in something your grandfather told you. And I'm going to read you the quote. There are two great days in your life, the day you were born and the day you realize why you were born. Talk to me about how that wisdom has really inspired you and shaped the way you help coach other leaders.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that quote. My grandfather was one of the wisest people I knew, was one of the biggest inspirations in my life. I remember pretty vividly being in high school and I'm doing some work around their house, helping do some things. He kind of sets me down and tells me that quote: there are two great days in your life, the day you're born, the day you realize why you're born. I'm a high school kid and I'm like, okay, great. And I remember about 4 years later or so, I was about to graduate from college and he had some progressive illness that had kept him from doing a lot of the things he wanted to do. But I was over at his house again, trying to move some boxes around and try to do some things to help him organize some stuff. And he sat me down again and repeated that quote. And I thought about it a little differently at that point. And it just made me think. And he was a person who was on purpose. And that quote has a lot to do with purpose. But the reason that it is part of who I am as I think about how we train leaders is two things. One, there are two great days, and you can get into more about what that really means. But the way I view it and why we named our company Great Days is day one, the day you're born, with the talents, gifts, strengths, and abilities that you are brought into this world with. You are created uniquely and wonderfully, and we believe that. And every single person has gifts, natural gifts, talents, and abilities. And we want to help people understand themselves and maximize those gifts. And then the day two piece is, how do you do that in the pursuit of something that matters? That purpose piece, the why behind you were made uniquely to be an estate attorney, to be a financial planner, to be someone who thinks about insurance, whatever it may be. There are giftings that you have to be able to see things differently, to be thoughtful towards things. And then how do you help turn those? We try to help people shape those, understand those, and then shape their work and their lives in the pursuit of doing something of importance with those. So whether that's in the business world or in their nonprofit work or community involvement or volunteering, whatever it may be, we do believe there are some great days. And when you maximize your greatest natural giftings, and when you put those towards something that matters, you can make a real difference in the world. So that quote meant a lot to me because of who said it to me. He didn't come up with that quote. I thought for years that he did, but the reality is, I think an 1800s theologian, William Barclay, said it first, but he definitely shared it with me probably more than two occasions, but it stuck with me, and it's always meant something to me to try to maximize my gifts and live towards a purpose. And so now we get to try to help do that with other people.
I love that. Really goes right along with what we believe. We talk with all of our legacy leaders network people we work with in all different industries a lot about legacy. And the real question when it comes down to legacy is exactly what you're talking about. It's not just drifting through life, and whether you're an estate planning attorney or a financial advisor or in any of these industries, it really comes down to, what is your purpose? What is the legacy you want to leave? What is the impact you want to have in the world? And so everything that you've just said perfectly lines up with how we think, what we believe. I absolutely agree that everybody is born with a purpose, and they're here for a reason and have a unique set of gifts and talents. And so I love that you're using your experiences to really help people figure that out. I think it's shocking how far along in life adults can get without really ever asking themselves that question.
I don't mean to cut you off, but you're
No,
exactly right. Before you even said that, I probably should have said that a few minutes ago. But the reality is, I worked with college students for a long time, but I would also teach graduate programs, and I'd be teaching, classes on strategic planning and organizational change and all these different things, and I would teach them to executives, in big giant companies that were coming to get their masters, to retool or to just kind of gain some new insights into all the things so they could advance in their career. But the 20-year-olds, we would talk about purpose, and there's one thing. But when we would talk to the 40, 50, even 60-year-olds who were in those courses, sometimes people older than me, frankly, the most interesting conversations were with people who thought, I don't know that I have one. And I would always stop them. You do. We just haven't found it yet. And the reality is, purpose is so hard to define. It's not a goal. A lot of people are very goal oriented. Purpose is not a goal. It's not a task. It's not a set of to-do items, right? It's a way of being. It frames who we are and shapes how we lead and live. And when we can find that, and when we can latch onto that, and we can focus in on that, we are almost unstoppable, because the match of gifts and purpose just go a long ways. And it's a really incredible thing to see people when the light bulb comes on, whether they're 18 or whether they're 38 or whatever it may be. And we get the opportunity to talk to people about that every day. And it's a lot of fun.
That is really interesting. And you mentioned you've worked with leaders from kind of all different sectors, a lot of different industries. You've worked with a lot of college age students, which I'm sure that's a very different purpose conversation, right? Like at 18, you're mostly dreams, very little experiences and world wisdom, versus when you're working with people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe older. They know what it's like to maybe live or work at a career that doesn't suit their purpose, or maybe they feel like they're drifting and they can't find their purpose. But you've worked with a lot of different industries and a lot of different ages. Across all of these different industries and ages, what are some of the common struggles that you see leaders face?
It's a great question. I think regardless of age or generation or sector, I think leaders, especially right now, are just finding leadership to be really lonely. I think it's always been the case, but I think it's even more lonely now. We can get into all the reasons. I do think leadership is both lonely and I think leadership is messy. And I think leaders sit alone in the middle of a mess and often find themselves really smart people who have built companies, built organizations, who lead companies and organizations, whatever it may be, often find themselves stuck. And it's not for a lack of knowing what to do, it's because they've gotten so caught up in the fog. It just keeps them from being able to see the next step. And I think that's a big deal. And I think it's been intensified over the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, we can talk about COVID. That did a lot of damage to leaders because it was so hard, so many hard decisions being made, on short notice, and with little regard to all the ins and outs that you would normally take into consideration. So there's a wake behind those decisions that people have navigated. But even beyond that, I think over the last year or two, it's been even harder because it's a very polarized world in a lot of fronts. And a leader, you cannot appease or please everyone. And nowadays, there's not as much acceptance for, I guess you could say, this is the decision, we're going to go this way. It's, well, no, there's a lot of pushback and there's a lot of, I guess, there's a lack of regard and respect for institutions first and leadership positions second. And that's why I think whether I'm talking to a school principal or I'm talking to the CEO of a small company or the vice president of sales at a company, I mean, there's a collision of culture and worldview and politics and all the things that even add to that mess to where leaders just feel stuck. And I think that's probably the number one thing we hear. There's other things, there's people concerned about things related to retention of employees. That's a big deal these days. How it's so hard to hang on to people. That we could get into generational topics for a long time. I love talking about that, but there's the days of your identity being your work are long gone for many. Although we live and work in a 5 generation workforce right now, but you've got people who see that you should be loyal to this, and leaders are trying to navigate working with them. You skip a generation or two, and you still got people who are talking about work-life balance. And then you have all my Gen Z friends who are probably wiser than a lot of people would give them credit for, but are talking about life-work balance. And those of us in leadership positions are trying to lead and connect and move all of these people from where they are to where they need to be. And that is just a fascinating, messy, lonely place. And so I think there's a lot of things we could say, but at the end of the day, I find a lot of leaders who are stuck.
I think I agree with everything that you said. Leadership is definitely messy. It is also a very difficult time to be a leader, whether it's of a large company or of a smaller company, because there are a lot of different personalities. And then exactly what you said, you've got, used to you would get a job and that would be your career and you would stay at the same company for 30, 40, 50 years. And that's just not the mindset anymore. And the priorities of these younger generations coming up are really different. From the sense of loyalty is different. The things that they prioritize when seeking out employment somewhere is very different. So it's a very interesting time for leaders to be navigating a very messy world with a lot of different expectations and personalities. And like you said, you can't please everyone. And I feel like as a leader, there are always, people that work for you that come to you with, this is what we need. These are our problems. Everybody brings things up the chain, but leaders are at the top. And so there's not a lot of, where do we go to talk to people? It's difficult. You don't want to have some of these conversations you need to have with employees of yours. There's the confidence issue. That really makes leadership very isolating. What is your recommendation for leaders that are really struggling with that?
Well, two things, and this has been going on long before we started our own versions of this in our company. But I think there's a lot more receptivity to having an executive coach. It's not uncommon anymore for people to have that. I think there's some value in having a coach. Our model is a little different. And the reason it's a little different is because I think there's some limitations to coaches who are just putting people through frameworks. Although I value frameworks as an academic, I understand the framework models. But what we try to do and what I encourage people to do is find somebody who can be your sounding board. Find somebody who can be your sounding board. I have clients who that's the program we put them in, is the sounding board program, really. I'll just tell you one really quick example, if I can, a story. A man called me, I guess it was back in January of this year, or he sent me an email and said, "Hey, I hear you can help me." And I knew him, but I didn't know him well. And I was like, well, I'm a startup. I'll email everybody back, right? So I emailed him back, said, "Hey, let's get it together." He said, let me call you this afternoon. He called me. He's so excited. This is on a Monday. He called me that afternoon. He's so excited to talk about how do I grow my business. He's a small company. He's got 3 companies, 8 employees. They help run all these pieces. That's on Monday. He calls me super excited. We want to grow this business. So he wants some strategy help. He wants some thoughts on how to lead change in his company, on and on. We set up a coffee for Wednesday. This is on Monday. Tuesday morning, 9:00, I get a voicemail. I'm sitting in another meeting with another client, and I get a voicemail from this man from the day before. "Hey, Matt, this is so-and-so. Something happened this morning. I don't know that we're going to be able to meet tomorrow, but I really would like to talk to you about this." Okay. So I called him after my session or my speech or whatever I was doing at the time. And I called him. I said, "Hey, how is everything? Your voicemail sounded like you're a little upset." He goes, "Yeah, I think I'm going to sell the company." This is 24 hours after we had just talked about growing the company. I said, "Whoa, tell me what's going on here." And his first reaction, or his story included his first reaction to the news that his number 2 had walked in that morning and said, "My family's moving out of state. I'm going to have to quit." And his reaction, this very intelligent person, smarter, way smarter than me, smarter than most people. His first reaction, because all of a sudden the stress and the pressure and the moment there was, I can't replace her, so I'm just going to sell. And I said, "Well, when is she leaving? Did she give you 2 weeks?" He said, 7 months. I said, "Whoa, hold on." Hold on here. I said, "I don't know anything about your business yet." We hadn't met yet, other than a brief phone call to set up a meeting. I said, "Let's keep our meeting tomorrow. We don't need to talk about selling the company or growing it. I need to better understand where we are, who this person is, why in 7 months we don't think we can replace, maybe work an arrangement to retain, backfill, whatever it is." I'm like, I just need to know some things. And we met there and we went on and we've been working together ever since. And it's been fascinating. He didn't sell. We worked out an arrangement for her to work remotely and keep things moving. And he had his best year this year.
It's great.
And that's not a me thing, but he was just so stuck.
Right.
And I think leaders get stuck. They get caught in the fog, and especially right now, because it seems like every day, every hour, there's something popping. And we have access to all the information in the world, but sometimes it's just the ability to breathe. And so having somebody you can talk to and be a sounding board is really important. The other second thing, a long answer to your question, second thing would be small group leadership development. Small groups. It's a known thing that people do well, grow more, participate, engage in development opportunities when it's a small group of people who have similar backgrounds and or levels of responsibility. We offer what we call core groups based on these core principles that we teach. Other groups do a really good job with this as well. And when people come together, they get to kind of take the guard down and say, "This is what I'm struggling with." And it's not counseling necessarily, and it's not coaching really. It's facilitating conversations for people who are needing somewhere to vent sometimes, strategize with other people, because they can't always go to their teams and say, "This is a struggle right now," or because they need to feel they need to stay above all that with their teams. And so executive coaching, somebody to be a sounding board, and small group leadership development or growth programs. Those are the 2 things we recommend to most everybody.
That makes a lot of sense, especially I love the idea of the small groups, the core groups, because I feel like probably what happens, the conversation in that a lot is these leaders coming in, feeling isolated, thinking that these problems they have within their own companies are unique to them, and then get in there with a group of people with similar backgrounds and realize, we're actually all probably dealing with the same types of things, the same frustrations, the same types of problems, the same people issues. So I can see where a core group for multiple reasons would be a really healthy thing to have, probably something we all need to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it was one of the first things we started when we started this company. I just believe in it fully. I've known others who've done similar things. We teach 8 principles. There's part of a book I have coming out in April, these leadership principles, but we teach them, but then we get out of the way. We try to have a conversation. They're just a starting point to start a conversation. And whether we're talking about how to lead change in an organization or how to manage up or how to lead across generations or communicate or whatever it may be, those conversations are so rich and people walk out and they better understand themselves. They better understand the fact they're not alone and they have some clarity towards how to fix the mess that they find themselves in. And we all have our messes. Every day there's something, right? There's always seemingly something. So it's fun. It's fun and it's also really worthwhile and it seems to be positively received.
Very cool. Okay, before we run out of time, I still have several questions. I plan to completely pick your brain today. So, one thing that was interesting that I've seen you talk about other places, and this applies to where our team is right now at the law firm. We are opening new offices, we are hiring new team members, we're hiring new attorneys. We have some attorneys that are leaving. We are in a very transitional time right now with our company, and I know a lot of our listeners are as well. So, talk to us about change. It can feel very destabilizing for teams. It kind of feels like right now our company is a revolving door with people coming in and people going out. What is your advice for leaders trying to lead through times like this of growth? Maybe for some companies they're shrinking, but times of growth, times of transition. What is your advice for leaders to keep people on mission, to keep people encouraged, and to really kind of keep people anchored into the company?
Yeah, I love that. Change is such a unique and massive topic, but I'll try to give you 4 things that I teach and speak on pretty regularly. I think of change as a story. So take your law firm. You're adding, you're losing people, you're growing, you're entering different markets, whatever it may be. What you're really doing is you're changing the story, right? And so we think about some story related elements. The first one is the plot. What are we doing? The challenge is in many organizations, many companies, change is something that is feared and or misunderstood by team members, partly because they feel like all we do is change. Because for so many people, so many organizations, that's the go-to move, right? This isn't working, let's restructure. Well, that didn't work either, let's restructure again. Or it's like change for the sake of change is not helpful. So the plot of your story is, are we really sure what we're doing, what we're changing is the right what? That's a big deal. And it's often overlooked because you have busy team members, busy leaders, busy leadership teams that, sitting around a table and, okay, we need to do this, let's go. And there's some tools, there's some ways to make sure what we're doing is the right tool. And people are very smart, they have these tools, but bringing them to the forefront is really important. The second piece that is just incredibly important to any story is the characters, right? Because the characters in your story make all the difference. Because what worked over there may not work over here because you have a different set of characters. Think about your favorite TV show, your favorite movie. You take any one of those characters out and it changes the dynamics of the whole show. Think about those shows where somebody leaves there's 2 seasons left. I used to watch The Office and Steve Carell left and it was a different show.
Right.
They found their way eventually, but it changed things. Well, think about the characters involved and not just who's leaving and coming and going, but how are they receiving? There's 3 questions. I didn't come up with these questions. I read in a book called Change the Way You Lead Change years ago that every single person in your firm is asking when you introduce a new change opportunity to them. Can we do this if we try? What happens if this works? What happens if it doesn't work? And then how much do I value those consequences? Those people you want to bring with you in the story. They're asking those questions. And as leaders, we have to understand their questions, provide answers for those questions, be ready to embrace the truth that those questions will reveal in our plot of our story and our desire to change. The third thing really quickly is the setting of the story, the internal and external factors. The context of your story is the setting. If you took Lord of the Rings, and my 17-year-old daughter was just talking about Lord of the Rings the other day. She said, "Have you seen that? Have you heard of that?" I was like, "Yeah, it was a big deal at one point." But it's this beautiful scenery, right? Well, imagine taking the exact same story and placing it in New York City or some big city. It's a totally different story, right? The setting
Right.
makes all the difference. Well, the setting for your story has internal factors and external factors, regulations, politics, all the things, internal people, internal politics, dynamics, leadership, all that kind of stuff. And then you get to the part, which is the fourth part, which is the part of the story that's like, all right, action. And that's where most people jump to when you go to back in the old days when you used to go to a bookstore and you go to a change management book, you pull one off the shelf. It was, here's these 6 steps, 8 steps, 4 steps for leading change. It was the action plan versus all these other pieces. And I think you have to have these other pieces in place before you jump into action. And so when I work with organizations on change management strategies or trying to help a leadership team navigate a big change, we start with those 4 elements. We really dive into each of them. We try to make sure that we understand the plot, we understand the characters, we understand the setting, and then we kind of make the action steps to go forward. We'll try to introduce the change.
That is a lot of great wisdom, and for our listeners, and then for me as well. So thank you for sharing that. That gives me a lot of things to kind of think through. We're in a transitional time and it isn't bad, right? We've got a lot of growth, we've got a lot of new hires. I think change for everyone feels a little bit scary. So I love the idea of kind of looking at it as a story and being able to build everything around that is something that is a good model to work from, would give everybody some peace and comfort to recognize the different pieces of the story.
Yeah, you're writing the next chapter. And
Right.
that may seem cliche and simple, but it is. In some ways, it's not like change has never happened before. And people who are fearful or resistant to changing what is, that probably hasn't always been the way either. So let's remind them we've been there, we've done that, we know how to do this. We're being thoughtful to you, we're being thoughtful to everything that needs to be thoughtful towards, that we need to be thoughtful towards. And we can do this. And we're going to have a great next chapter. And you're going to be a big part of it. And
Oh, I love that.
there's a different mentality when it comes that way.
I love that. That absolutely. Yeah, that really reframes it well. Okay, before we run out of time, this is a principle. I know it's a biblical principle, but talk to our listeners a little bit about what you teach on servant leadership and why that's important.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I teach the basics of leadership based on 8 core values, and I'll tell you where they come from very quickly here. The last verse of the book of Esther, for those who are familiar with the story of Esther, the 10-second version, teenage queen assumes the role of queen. The king has a second in command who's got an ego out of control. His name was Haman. Haman decides to glorify Haman. It's a crazy story. If you pick it up, it's a great book. And the book of Esther. So you go through the story. Haman begins to make plans to take out what he doesn't know are the queen's people.
Right.
The queen has a mentor, uncle, relative, that's a mentor, someone who takes care of her named Mordecai. Queen Esther does. And as Mordecai gets into Esther's ear, talks about maybe this is why you're here. There's a beautiful line in there. For such a time as this, that's the most well-known line. It's beautiful. Esther, this teenage, essentially beauty queen, to be honest, is how she assumed that role, has to sit in the middle between the role she plays and her people, and it's tough. And she had no leadership development classes, I promise, that I can find anywhere in history. And the cool thing she said was, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do what it takes to keep this from happening. And one of the coolest lines she says, if I perish, I perish. And the courage that young woman in her leadership role took on is just amazing. But the picture for leadership that I and a co-author take from that story is actually the very last verse of the book of Esther. So Haman, the number 2, is now out of the picture. And the king looks around and he names Mordecai as the new number 2. There's a lot of details I'm leaving out, obviously. But the last verse, so it's the same job description as the last guy had, whose ego was a mess, right? The last verse of the book of Esther says this. It says, Mordecai was held in high regard by all the Jewish people because he worked for the good of the people and he spoke up for their welfare. Our picture of leadership is that we as leaders are here to work for the good of the people. It's not just about strategy and conflict management and communication skills and all those things. Those are extras. There are these core values that when you put them all together, when you lead with your ears, when you embrace the truth, when you keep your ego out of control, from getting out of control. But all these things that we talk about, when you're coachable, right? When you know where you're going and why, when you pace yourself so you can extend the game longer. These 8 principles, they start with this one, which is work for the good of the people. Whatever your role is, you're working for the good of others. And too many times, too many people, too many leaders end up in positions, people end up in leadership positions that it's about them. It's about their agenda. It's about their desire to see this. It's about their power trip. It's about a lot of things. We see it in every sector. We see it publicly. We see it all over the place. It can be a challenge and it leaves a wake on the other side. And so we teach starting principle, work for the good of the people. And when you focus on who you work for with a sense of purpose, like we talked about earlier, and you work for those people and you're trying to elevate their natural gifts, strengths, talents, and abilities, your company, your team, your organization can go a long way and a lot further. And you can be the type of leader that people tell good stories about, like Mordecai. So
I love that. I've always loved the story of Esther, and it's just such an interesting. There are so many incredible stories in the Bible, and Esther is just one of the many. But Esther was a character I was absolutely obsessed with when I was younger, and so it's very interesting, kind of re-looking at that story from the perspective of an adult, and being able to take away some of the wisdom that she had, and then Mordecai as well. So I love that. I love the idea of servant leadership. And really, in being a servant leader, that does give you a sense of purpose. You know exactly who you're working for, and you know what your sense of purpose is, what your goal is to be able to really serve and help the people that are working for you at the same time. So I love that view. I've always loved the model of servant leadership. I think it's incredible. And I love that you guys teach that as part of your program. All right,
yeah.
so last question, and this is going to be the hardest one maybe that I have for you. So buckle up. All right. So, through all the work that you do, the work that you have done working in higher education, and now the work that you're doing with this company, with all of these different leaders that you get to impact through your coaching, what is it you hope your legacy will be?
Mm. So I tell people all the time, and it's mostly because I remind myself all the time. We live in a world where people constantly talk about brand, and brand is a known word. We don't have to dissect it here, but your leadership brand is essentially the stories people tell about you. It's not the stories you tell about you. And I learned that somewhere along the way. I wish I could figure out where I learned that from. I've looked back in, graduate school notes and other things. I was like, where did I pick that up? But it's something I've taught for a long time, but it's something because I think about it a lot. You want to have a strong brand. There are brands you go to, your family goes to, your friends go to when they need this or this, they go straight to that brand, and they go there because there's consistency. They know what they're getting and they trust it. And you go to that brand, and you, Katie Beth, you have a brand. I have a brand, but it's not just the stories we want to tell. It's the stories people tell after they've experienced us. And part of a legacy is that piece. It's the stories that people tell that go on beyond us. That's what I used to tell young people. The stories that people tell are when you're trying to get that next job. They call me or somebody else for a reference. They're not asking for your GPA. They're not asking for how many times you missed this or did that or whatever. They're asking, tell us about them. Tell us the stories. And that's not just when you're brand new, that's all the way through your career. And so we try to help people write good stories for their lives and for their leadership. And not in a manipulative kind of way, but in a way that truly brings about influence, that we have maximized our gifts, we've lived on purpose, and in doing so, we've created an environment where people have good experiences. Not always easy. I mean, we have to hold people accountable. You have to do all the hard things as leaders that you don't get out of that. But if you do it in a way where there's truth shared and embraced, and where there is grace with that truth when you share it, people will tell good stories. When you hold them accountable and you do it the right way, people will tell good stories. And you can make a difference when you stack good stories together. And so when we talk about legacy, it's a lot about brand, and not so much just because it's a buzzy kind of word, but because there's something that everybody understands about that. And leaders and their legacies, that's really all you have at the end. The money goes away, the stuff goes away, the position goes away. I know way too many leaders who left leadership positions where everybody used to, when they snapped, they jumped, and now they're kind of by themselves because they were transactional more than relational. And the stories were, I don't want to deal with her, I don't want to deal with him. And so now they're lonely again. They're not in a leadership role anymore, but they're lonely again, and they've created these messes. But at the end of the day, we want people to tell good stories about you and about your leadership and about the role that you've played in their life, whether at work or in the community or wherever it may be.
I love that. That is a fantastic answer. And I promised you that would be, I could pick your brain the rest of the day, but I promised you that I would wind down after that question. So thank you so much for jumping on and answering all of my questions. And for everybody who is listening, we want to thank you for tuning in to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Katie Beth Hand. And my guest today was Dr. Matt Paden. And to get connected with Dr. Paden and Great Days Leadership, you can find out more at greatdaysleadership.com. Is there anything else you would like our listeners to know, or any other ways you'd like them to get connected?
Well, you can follow us on socials. LinkedIn is where we do most of our stuff related to our work. We do have, excited to announce, I guess the first time I'm going to say it out loud, a book being published on April 21st called The Core. It's part story, part leadership fable, if you will, and then part kind of a description of those 8 principles, some of which I just mentioned. So really excited about going big with that. My co-author and I are really excited. He's the president of Oklahoma Christian University in Edmond, Oklahoma. And these are a lot of the principles that he has shared with me over the years, and I've added a few in there. We've been working on this, and so we're excited about that. But yeah, greatdaysleadership.com, and on social media, we'd love to connect and love to hear from you if there's ever anything we can do to help you and your team have more great days at work.
That's phenomenal. Well, thank you so much again for making the time. This was great.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate what you're doing, and God bless you.
You've been listening to the Legacy Leaders Podcast with Katie Beth Hand and Stan Miller. For more information on them and the show, please visit pinnaclelegacylaw.com. If you like what you've learned today, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.